Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Event Insider session. I'm really happy to see everybody who's already joined us today. I greatly appreciate everyone who has taken time out of their day to join us for today's panel session and tune in to hear some advice from our speakers. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Becca, and I will be the host and moderator for today's session. In today's session, we are going to be having our 3 guest panelists discuss their expert tips for managing your workload as an event organizer. Before our session, we did open 4 session polls for everyone to answer. The polls are still available, so for anyone who's just now logging on and hasn't had the chance, please feel free to go ahead and submit your responses to the polls. Before our guest panelists join us, I do want to share some of the submitted responses that we have so far. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we'll go over some of those today. All right, the first question that we asked our participants today is, what do you want to get the most from the session? And these are some of the responses we've had so far. Somebody said tips and shortcuts. Somebody else said, how do you work a full-time job and plan a conference for your association? We also have tips from others that plan similar sized events, new ideas about how to prioritize what needs to get done, and also how to involve volunteers, and tips for session entry. So that's great, and I'm sure our panelists will be talking about some of these today as well. So hopefully we get some of these answered today. The next question we asked is, what do you find most challenging when prioritizing tasks for your event? The most common response was managing changes and unexpected requests, followed by estimating the time required for each task, which was right around 40 to 50%, and then aligning tasks with budget constraints. So those seem to be the most challenging parts as well today. The third question we asked is, what strategies do you use to find staff or volunteers for your events? And it seemed overwhelmingly, most people use word of mouth and personal networks, as well as referrals from current staff or volunteers. So thank you everyone who answered this one as well. And then the last question that we asked today is, how do you handle event planning when working with limited resources? And the majority of people said prioritizing essential elements of the event over less critical ones, followed by reusing or repurposing materials from past events. That was almost at 60% of respondents. And then also using digital tools and technology to streamline the process. And then just over 40%, we also had leveraging partnerships and sponsorships to increase resources. So thank you everyone who took the time to share your thoughts on today's polls. It's really great to see all of these responses as well. And then before we get started with our session, I do have one exciting announcement to make. Whova is really soon going to be releasing 2 new tiers for our Call for Speakers feature, where you can centralize and streamline your Call for Speakers process and overall reduce the number of tools you need. So I do want to announce that we are going to be hosting 3 webinars to cover the new tiers. The first one is going to be starting next week on Thursday, May 23rd at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And then we'll have one for the following 2 Thursdays as well. So I do want to invite everybody to join us for a live product demo and also have any questions about this feature answered live as well. And we can share registration links with you as well if you are interested in joining, and we would love to see you there. In the meantime, if you are interested in learning more about using Whova for your Call for Speakers, I do want to encourage everyone, if you are already a customer, to contact your account manager. Otherwise, you can schedule a free one-on-one demo to learn more as well. And then just to stay up to date with all of our latest releases, please go ahead and follow Whova on LinkedIn. We do post about our recent releases there as well. You can scan the QR code here with your phone, or you can copy or type in this link in your browser as well. We also send out a newsletter on a regular basis, so please check that out as well. It'll include our more recent releases. And then finally, of course, just staying in contact with your account manager is also a great way to stay up to date.
To keep up to date with the latest event industry trends, subscribe to Whova's YouTube channel and click the bell icon to receive notifications whenever new content is posted.
So with all of that being said, it is officially time to start our panel. So I want to start by introducing our guest panelists for today. So the first panelist I'd like to welcome to our virtual stage today is Claire Gardin. Claire is the event and project manager for clinical education. Claire, thank you so much for being our guest panelist. I am so excited to have you. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, my name's Claire. I work for an organisation called Clinical Education, and we are based in the UK. And I run a wide range of events for healthcare professionals.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. Our next guest panelist today is Cassian Godsted. Cassian is the Internal Systems Admin for Interalliance of Greater Cincinnati. So Cassian, thank you. It's great to have you as our guest speaker. Would you also like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Great to be here. Hi, I'm Cassian. I'm Internal Systems Admin for Interalliance. Interalliance is a small nonprofit based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. We do youth education work. We host an event called Tech Olympics, which is the largest student-run tech conference for students in the country.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassian. And then our last guest panelist on our virtual stage today is Keith Koehne. Keith is the executive director, also from Interalliance of Greater Cincinnati. So Keith, thank you so much for being here and welcome. Can you make an introduction as well?
Absolutely. Thanks, Becca. It's nice to be with everybody today. My name is Keith Koehne. I'm the executive director of the Interalliance. I work with Cassian. I have the great pleasure to work with him every day. And as was mentioned, we are a nonprofit that our mission is to grow and diversify the IT talent pipeline around Greater Cincinnati, but in other regions as well. And excited to share our journey with you all today.
Thank you so much, Keith. I'm super excited to have you all here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all on our topics today. So to get started, we are going to start off with just a few warm-up questions. Claire, I'll start with you first. Can you share a little bit about the events you have run recently? For example, how many days they are, how many attendees, any concurrent sessions or exhibitors, anything like that?
Sure. So I run a mix of one-day events right through to 3-day on-site in-person events. Run those mainly in London, and they vary in attendance size. So the most recent one I had close to 400. The 2 and 3-day ones, maybe 250, 300. All of my events mainly are single track. I have done concurrent before, but single track just because of the nature of the type of conferences that we run. And I do work with exhibitors. We have our peak probably about 36.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you so much, Claire. Cassian, can you share about your recent event as well?
Sure. We run an event called Tech Olympics, like I mentioned. It's an in-person technology conference run by and for high school students. We have students, teachers, volunteers, sponsors, and staff, all attending to around 536 attendees that last year. We have breakout presentations, competitions, workshops, around 10 sessions at once. It can be hard to keep track of everything day of. Last event, we had 22 exhibitors as well, most with sponsor booths and all set up in the Hoop app.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cassian. Keith, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, Cassian gets to take care of everything, so I'm good. It was a fantastic event, really well run, really well managed, and again, as I said, all run by students, which is great.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's super impressive. All right, moving on to our next warm-up question. We do have event organizers of all different size events from all sectors. So I am curious, what is about the biggest or generally the size of the event staff that you have managed or been a part of? Keith, we can start with you for this one.
Sure. So following up from the last question, as I said, we are a student-run organization. So I'm the only full-time employee of our organization, and my C-suite is made up of high school students. And each of them lead a team of high school students. And all in total, we have about 31 students who are on our staff. Again, they're full-time high school students, and they're very talented. So they're taking lots of other classes and courses and activities and things. But that's really the group that we've got, and that's about the group that we have that runs a lot of our events throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, that's great for sure. Thank you, Keith. Cassian, do you have anything to add to that as well?
I think Keith covered most of it. It's around 31 high school students. We have 4 or 5 adult part-time workers as well as Keith, myself included. 31 students managing. I think in 2022 we had 750 attendees.
That's super awesome. All right, Claire, what about you?
So my core team, there is me, and I have a core team of 3 who work both full-time and part-time on the events that I run, but on site, obviously, we have to expand our resources. So I've managed a team of about 25.
All right, wow, very cool. Okay, well, with that in mind, from the beginning of the event planning stages all the way to the final reflection, what is your strategy to effectively manage your event staff or your event production team? Claire, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, so I think it's really important with any event from the outset is really getting everyone on board and understanding the purpose of what you're doing, like set your intentions. Like this event is to teach, execute, sell this, and this is the reasons why we're doing that. I also think when we're planning out, I think that everyone needs to agree the key deliverables and create a timeline for that, and to have someone keep everyone accountable for that. And I think as well, what I've learned is that actually when you're delivering key messages, written or verbal, just make everything really clear and concise and say what you mean. So, you know, that, you know, I need you to do this because this affects this, I need it by then, is probably the underlying strategy that underpins all of the communications that we have within our team.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it sounds like buy-in, delegation, clear communication
Right.
are all really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Claire. Cassian, what's your strategy?
Keith can cover more of this than me, but I think it comes down to meeting as much as we can as well. We don't want to stifle people with a lot of meetings, but when it comes to managing high school students and volunteers in general, making sure that everyone's on the right track is nice. Our cabinet meets once a week, and then main staff meets at least once a month, multiple times a month, going into the final few months of Near Tech Olympics. But just making sure everyone's on the right track is the most crucial thing, regardless if it's high scores or not.
Sure.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
sorry, Becca, just a point about meeting and delegation and things. I have been guilty in the past, and the big lesson that I have learned is not trusting anyone else, like to do what I do best. Like, you know if I do it, it's going to get done the way that I want it. And I've learned the hard way that you need to delegate and trust your team, because they can do it as long as they have the buy-in, the purpose, and also the delegation.
Absolutely. And that's a great point as well. Keith, what about you?
Yeah, that's awesome, Claire, because that's the hardest thing as a leader, to give up that control because you know how you want it to look. As Cassian mentioned, I think that whole idea of like getting grounded at the beginning is important. So we spend a weekend retreat. Our event takes place in February. We spend a weekend together in September, getting on the same page, understanding how we work. Anytime you have events like this, there's natural conflict that happens. And so if you don't have a general understanding from the beginning about why we're doing this, what people's strengths are, how we're going to communicate, then when those challenges come, the 11th hour at the end, then things get really ugly. We mentioned the regular meeting habits and cadence that we have. Those are important. Another tool that we've used, we've just created a spreadsheet called a run book that is the central hub for everything. So rather than each team or each person having their own way of organizing their information, we know that everybody has one shared document that has all the timelines, all the deadlines. If anything needs to be moved, it's done by everybody together, not just one person missing deadlines and whatever else. So I think that's really important. And I also see, and it's sort of the nature of our organization, is that delegation is part of our education with our student leaders. And so we really want to hand that over to our leaders and then have them hand it over to their teammates and really hold them accountable. So it's almost like a learn by doing experience, which I think is great.
Yeah, that is really great. Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing that as well. It sounds like the spreadsheet is very organized and a good system. So with that in mind, I do want to hear from you all a little bit on how you manage wearing many hats at one time. So I want to start by asking if you can share a situation where you had to juggle multiple critical event planning tasks all at once, and how and what do you prioritize to make sure your event runs smoothly? Cassian, we can start with you.
Sure. I'm really used to having to wear many hats. Last Tech Olympics, I was having to juggle between helping with registration tasks and general tech support, all while trying to prepare for my own sessions. What I find important, and the thing I try to prioritize as much as possible, is the attendee experience. The thing I need to focus on always has to be the thing that attendees will see, what matters to their experience. Doesn't matter if the badges are sorted, except where it gets attendees to be signed in faster and less than chance they have to go through the acceptance table. Getting my session prepared isn't as more to make several hundred attendees go through registration correctly. To me, that has to be the priority.
Yeah, absolutely. Attendee experience is super important. Claire, what do you prioritize, and what is your strategy for that?
Just mirroring what Cassian said, really, is the attendee experience and what is actually going to affect the event running. Like, can the event still happen? What is it I need to do to tackle this thing? You know, there isn't a specific situation, I would say, where, you know, you have to manage multiple critical events, because in every event that I've ever run, there are always multiple critical events happening, usually in, like, I call it the week before, kind of a no-go zone. Like, that is the time where you are managing different things and wearing multiple hats. But the thing that I've learned is to delegate and trust in your team that they will deliver what they need to. And, you know, I think as well, and perhaps we'll come on to it a bit later, is making sure that you're prepared for on-site and making sure that whatever you can do in advance to make your life easier. I call it, to my team, I say, let's be your future friend, right? You know, you want to be on site and know that you've already done something that perhaps might take you 10 minutes on site, but actually if you've already done it, that's 10 minutes freed up for registration or whatever. So, you know, delegation, and also making sure that at every point you think, how can I make this an easier process for everyone? And the way that I work is now cascaded down into my team, so they now recognize, well, if I can do this now, I'm going to do that. But, you know, it's up to me to prioritize the things that needs to be done critically. And so that is my role, to make sure that everyone stays on focus within that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that, to be your own friend. That's really good. Thank you so much for sharing that. Keith, do you have anything to add for this one?
Just the piece of advice I heard at the very beginning last year was we have to get started earlier. And then we came to the end of everything. And then our advice to ourselves in our debrief was we should have gotten started earlier. So I think there's just that discipline of, we know we have to do it, but how do we force ourselves to pull things forward that might be able to be done later, to do them earlier, so we can have that sort of peace of mind that Claire's talking about. I don't know how to do that. We'll learn that from the rest of the panelists here, but that's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties in really well with our next question, which is talking about managing deadlines. So I want to ask our panelists now, how do you manage the ever-present pressure of deadlines and event planning, making sure you're still doing strategic decision-making and consistently delivering high-quality experiences, even with tight timelines? So Claire, we'll go back to you to start.
Yeah, I think it does come back to, like, relaying your expectations. Like, you are the event manager, right? And so you have a very clear agenda about how you want this event to run and look. And so you've brought in all of your team, right? And at that point, we mutually agree expectations. Like, I would expect that perhaps all of the sponsorship elements will be in by a month out. And so I think having those clear expectations from the beginning is really key. And, you know, we use a lot of time management tools, but what works the best is a shared spreadsheet, as I'm hearing from my fellow panelists, that everyone has access to all of the time. Another key way that we keep accountable is to diarize check-ins and making sure that people come to that meeting prepared. And so we have, like, a template that we work on, and it has a reminder of all the key timelines if they need to move, what obstacles are there, we kind of go at it. And also delegating things that, because what I think, and I'm sure everyone would agree who's worked in events, that the biggest frustration and biggest time hoover is waiting on other people to do what they're supposed to do. And if you ever worked with external speakers or people submitting content, if you need it, we have to submit it for external accreditation. Like, that is a big part of waiting around when the content is late and stuff. Hoover's got some great tools for speakers, and so with the having them add their own bios and pictures was an absolute game changer. So it puts the onus on them, saying, hey, if you don't do this, then you're not going to have a profile, which is the kind of the reason why they speak at our events, right? But again, just delegation using technology and also your expectations with the staff is probably what I would say.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. That's a really great point as well. Cassian, what is your take on this one?
Sure. Like Keith brought up, we have our Tech Always Run book, which is this ever-evolving spreadsheet of that has every single task on there, and it has dates and descriptions and make people assign to it. I think that really helps for me. Being able to have everything in one place makes the deadlines more achievable, because it turns these massive obligations of opening registration and finding speakers and deploying laptops to more minor achievable tasks that have reasonable deadlines. It's constantly evolving. We're always updating it. We updated a bunch this year because we changed our registration process. We're probably gonna have to change it again for next year because we're changing registration hosts again. But it's just it makes sense for us to be able to be able to update this spreadsheet and know, okay, here's what happened before, here's what we need to do now, and how could we change the spreadsheet to be about now, what we're doing this year.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Cassian. Our next question is, what, just like during your day-to-day, what do you prioritize and structure your daily workload to make sure you're making progress and avoid getting bogged down by any task overload? Keith, we can start with you on this one.
Sure. So my daily workflow is I'm an early riser, so I like to get all of these tasks, especially when we're leading up to something like this. I start my day with our big event, and I spend the first chunk of my day understanding where everybody is, what things we have coming up. It just forces me to prioritize the things that are most important. I think that helps to clarify my messaging with everybody else. So I think that's been helpful for me, and it's if I don't do that, I end up being really frustrated or concerned or worried throughout the course of the day when I don't need to be.
Yeah, for sure. Setting yourself up for success, starting from the very beginning. That's great. Cassian, what about you?
Yeah. For me, it's interesting because I'm not a full-time worker at Alliance. I'm work part-time. So when I am there working on stuff, I want to make sure I'm able to be as focused as possible. So I usually end up copying the tasks for me from the run book into one main spreadsheet that's just focused on the things that need to be done now. Just helps us keep myself on track because we're able to see where I'm at, what our hyper tasks are, what's falling behind, and it helps me prevent task overload from looking at everything all at once.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like great advice as well. Claire, what about you? What does your daily workflow look like?
I'm pretty old school, I'm sad to say, in that I love a list and pen and paper. And so what I do is I check my emails early in the day, and if there's anything particularly pressing, then I will highlight those to deal with. But often how I work best is actually writing a list on pen and paper and highlighting the ones that I need to do first. Yeah, team list. Highlighting the ones that I need to do first, things that need to happen today. And then, you know, as you work through that list, actually everything that we do obviously all event planners wear many different hats, and I also, event planning is just a part of my role. It's not something that I do all of the time. But when it comes to when I'm doing stuff for events, talking about being your future friend, making sure that I'm doing everything as early as I can, because I find, especially when I'm running up to events, so I have always historically found that 14 days leading up to an event, that is when the bottleneck of tasks are happening. And so to avoid me losing my actual mind during that time, be doing stuff early on. So if there are things that I can tick off that list to make that process, that 14 days easier, because I think there was I think it was on one of the polls, one of the questions that somebody wanted answers was, how do you cope with unexpected or things that come in late or changes to event agenda? I've come to learn that no matter how hard you plan, how much work you do around communications, there is always something. And and when you're planning out in the planning stages of the event, you don't know what that something is, but you know it's going to happen. But if you have done the work beforehand to make sure that actually you can cope with that, and you have the breadth and bandwidth to deal with that, then that's something that I find really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. Advanced preparation, I also can sympathize with wanting the written list. It's really satisfying to check it off at the end.
Right. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to recruiting staff and volunteers. That's our next topic for today. I know that finding the right staff is really crucial for a successful event. So I do want to ask our panelists, what are some creative strategies you've used to find or recruit qualified staff members for your events? And is there anything specific you look for? Keith, we can go to you first.
Sure. Well, this is an important one for me because I'm about a year into my role as the executive director, and my predecessor was phenomenal at event planning and organizing. And this event was her passion for a decade or so. And so I knew coming in that I needed to find the right people to be able to help with that. Luckily, I have been able to lean on Cassian a lot in the last year. So that has been fantastic. I also knew what my strengths were and what my strengths aren't. And so finding somebody to really do event planning for us was important. We were fortunate to find somebody, and it wasn't understanding who to find, it was what's the right kind of role and person. And so Claire would be fantastic, but she's a little too far away from where we are to be able to do this. But finding somebody with those skill set, like attention to detail, hyper focus on getting things accomplished, a very strong communicator, those are the skills you're looking for, whether it's one person, a group of people, and then finding people who can work well together. I think you can get bogged down in petty disagreements and things as you get to that 14-day bottleneck. But it's really important to have people who want to work well and share the same passions that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Keith. Claire, what about you?
We traditionally rely on volunteers. So that's, recruiting the right people. When I've been really lucky with my team, actually, insofar as they are passionate about the work that we do, and they buy into everything we're trying to do. And I guess that, perhaps in other sectors, you can't really get people inspired about certain, events, but I'm really lucky that our events are ones that are compelling, I suppose, in so far as the content goes. But I don't know if there's anything specific I look for. I think, having a good relationship with your team, and as Keith alluded to, in those last 14 days, actually empathy goes quite a long way. Like you're all in here in the trenches doing this, and so understanding and empathy for that is good as well.
Absolutely. And that does tie in really well with our next question on volunteers. So what are some of the biggest challenges you face when managing volunteers, and how do you overcome them to make sure your event is successful? Is there anything in advance that you can do to prevent any predictable challenges? Claire, we can go back to you again for this.
Yeah. So as I said, I rely heavily on volunteers, and I'm really lucky is that, where I go to find those volunteers is somebody who's been to an event of ours before. And also the content is something that they're hungry for. So actually finding a volunteer, I've never had a challenge in finding volunteers. What is challenging is having them be accountable and not just be there for a free ticket. And so there are a number of ways that we do that. And again, the first is, having relay your expectations, like, we'd love you to help us. These are our expectations, and these are the things that you need to be doing. Of course, there have been times where people volunteer and they say, yes, that's fine, and then you don't see them. And so I guess that there's not a lot that you can, you can keep them accountable on site, but actually when they disappear, it's kind of, you've got a million other things to be worrying about. I think what's worked really well for me is an agreement, so a document that allows them to commit to the event. Doesn't have to be a scary document. It's just like a heads of terms saying, like, you've come and volunteered for us. We pay expenses, for example, so we're going to pay your expenses. Here is what we expect. Here is when you need to be on site. And that's a really good way of actually saying, hey, come and help us. Actually, you are going to help us, but here's what we need. And so that has really helped to sort the wheat from the chaff, in terms of people, if they're going to just disappear, then they tend to not respond to that agreement and just disappear. So that's a good strategy. But again, just buy-in, having them know what it is that you need and the reasons why you're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes having things in writing can make a huge difference. Thank you, Claire. Keith, what about you for this one?
Yeah, I love that idea of an agreement. At first when you said that, I was like a little taken back, but it does make sense. It's just a clear understanding of where you are and what's going on. So I wrote that one down. I think ours is unique. A lot of the planners that we have, as we said, are high school students who are volunteering their time to be a part of this, and there is buy-in naturally from them. But in order to put on this whole event, we have probably close to 150 volunteers who are business partners who are meeting with students who are interested in IT. We have presenters and speakers and just general volunteers who are helping out. And I do think that that commitment is the hardest piece of that. They're in, they believe in it, they want to be there. People are busy, we understand that, things change, last minute items come up, but that's the hardest thing to manage. And that's why you almost have to leave the volunteers, the true volunteers, on the outside, and they're just icing on the cake rather than being the really, the good stuff.
Yeah, great.
For sure. Cassian, do you have anything to add to this one as well?
I think another thing is just making sure you have good expectations of what you want your volunteers to do. A couple years ago, we had a call for technical volunteers to help with any technology issues that may arise, and then the event happened and we didn't run into issues. So we had people show up wanting to help, and we were kind of like, okay. Unfortunately, there's not problems, which is a great problem to have, but we felt bad because we had asked them to be there and then we weren't sure what to do with them. So I think it's a good idea to get everything in writing and making sure that, okay, here's what the volunteers are doing. Here's when they need to arrive. Here's when we need to receive them. Here's who's going to receive them. Making sure they have good directions all together. Making sure everyone understands what they're here for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cassian. It's good to think about the organization piece as well. Our last question for this section is, excuse me, going to be on delegation. I know that we've touched on this, our panelists have touched on this a few times throughout the panel, but delegation is super important for managing the workload when you have limited staff. So what are some of the best practices for effectively delegating tasks while making sure all of your team members still have the information and resources they need? Claire, we'll go back to you.
I think with delegation, I think letting go is obviously a big part of that for obvious reasons. For me, what's worked really well with delegation is actually giving someone an area of the event that they're responsible for. So in my team, it would work that somebody is responsible for exhibitors, and within that scope falls under payments, communications, pre-post event follow-up, that type of thing. And then another would be responsible for on-site comms, food and beverage, environment, and things like that. And so when we come together, those are the things that we talk about because those are our areas. Again, just regular check-ins to ensure that everyone's on track, and cultivating an environment where people feel safe to ask questions, because often, there can be barriers to people feeling confident about asking questions. And so taking an approach where actually no question is a silly question. You can ask me whatever you want. I don't want you to ask me on site when we've got a million other things to do. So, and I think that's a really good way to ensure that that is is a good delegation skill.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much, Claire. Cassian, what's your best practices or tips for delegation?
I think for me, because my tasks usually come down to more technical elements of the system, it's making sure that I'm writing a documentation and making sure that everyone understands as best they can what the systems are, what needs to be done for something to take place. For something like Hoover, that's not as bad as Hoover has its own documentation, but we have some internal tools that are less than user-friendly nowadays. So making sure that everything's documented, everyone understands. If I'm delegating something, then they can understand what they're doing and are able to make everything a success.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Cassian. Keith, do you have anything to add for this one as well?
I think Claire alluded to it also, is that having as much one-on-one conversation with the people that you're delegating to is really important, so that they don't feel like they're being caught by surprise and they have the chance to ask you clarifying questions about what you're asking them to do, and they can report back to you if somebody on their team is not delivering, to get advice. I think that's, rather than doing that in a large group, it's always nice to do that one-on-one.
Thank you so much, Keith. All right. Well, for our final topic today, we are going to be hearing from our guest panelists on how they manage to optimize all of their resources when planning their events. So the first question I want to ask for this is, with limited resources, how do you approach event planning in a way that's maximizing your efficiency while minimizing waste? Keith, we can go back to you to start.
Sure. I think my mindset has kind of shifted from resources or spending to investment. And I think about it in that kind of context. Like, if we're spending anything, we have to be investing in the attendee experience, the event experience. It's got to make a difference. And I think that kind of drives our mindset of, if we're going to choose to spend something, or how we get something accomplished, it's got to drive to that end. And I think that always keeps me in check about how do we utilize our minimal resources in the best possible way to prioritize those. So I don't know if that's totally the answer, but that's kind of the lens I use as much as possible.
No, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Keith. Cassian, what about you?
Yeah, Keith said before, we're a nonprofit, so we have to rely on limited resources. Our laptops are donations. Our site runs for free. We don't use external hosting tools. We don't use anything. I think the main paid tool we do use for Technical is Hoover, and that's probably one of our large expenses, except for obviously the venue, which is venues. Venues are expensive. But making sure that we are using our resources as best we can, knowing what we can do. One thing that we did recently was switch over our laptops from Windows to Linux, which helped us use them more fully, even though it's a little bit less user-friendly for some people. It gave us additional uses of this older, less powerful hardware. So we were able to keep using them long after they would have passed that minimum requirement for Windows. Windows 11 has a pretty high minimum requirements, so we're able to keep using these laptops through Linux securely, while also making sure they're still user friendly to students.
Thank you, Cassian. Claire, what about you for this one?
Okay, so when we get an event brief, whoever has given us the event, or whichever stakeholders that we're working with, actually getting their expectations around the attendee experience. And so, for example, that might be, do your attendees expect printed slides, or can we give it to them online, PDFs? And then if it's, in our case, our events are often training courses. And so as long as you understand the expectation, then you can plan your resources effectively. So for example, with a particular course that we run, they were printing out reams and reams of paper for people to work off. And actually we were like, well, one, it's not very good for the environment. We're trying to be as environmentally friendly as possible. Number two, it is a huge draw in resources to print and ship that. So we said, well, we're going to say the expectation is that, we're going to release the notes in PDF, and you can bring a laptop with you, and then you can make notes. And this is how you make notes. And these are the reasons why we're not printing them. In terms of other ways if you are on limited resources, and I've never run an event where resources aren't limited, I think we're all trying to do it on a minimal team and minimal spend. I think venue contracts are a really good place to really save some of that bottom line, because my experience with venue contracts is that they're incredibly complicated and there are loads of things that they'll charge extra for. And actually, if you negotiate that from the start and relay your expectations of what you expect, and getting a venue buy-in to say, like, this is the event I want to run, and these are the things that I would want. And if you're lucky enough to have an event that is repeated, actually you have quite a lot of power, more power than perhaps the venue would think that you would have in buying that space on a continual basis. So I think really skimming off what you can off of a venue contract is the way that we have maximized our return on our events. In terms of resources for people, there are loads of online tools that can really help you save time. Hoover is one of them. I'm sure there are many more that everyone uses. But I think making sure that we're thinking smarter, and also as well, making sure that what's important to me as a planner is making our event more sustainable. Not only does that mean environmentally, it means making sure that we're doing things smarter that uses less of our energy as people and also energy of the planet.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. That's great advice as well. We do have just a few more questions left, so I do want to give a reminder to our audience. If you haven't submitted Q&A yet, please go ahead and submit your questions, and we will be getting to those in just about 5 to 10 minutes. And with that being said, we'll go ahead on to our next question, which is, when do you begin the planning process, and when do things start to feel overwhelming? As well as any tips on how to plan more effectively or tasks specifically that are overwhelming and how you would address them. Cassian, we'll go back to you for this one.
The thing, we really started planning in February. We really started planning Tech Olympics at our staff onboarding events in August, planning for the events in February. I think while planning, we need to focus on what works, what makes your event special. We go through lessons learned at the end of the year after Tech Olympics, and make sure to improve upon those as much as possible. And again, we also get feedback from our staff and our students who worked about what worked that year as well. We get a lot of people who attend Tech Olympics that then go on to work Tech Olympics. That happened for me. I attended Tech Olympics for 3 years before eventually coming in and working it. It is an entirely different experience behind the scenes, but one that I actually genuinely prefer at this point. And this is your first event. You need to focus on the events that you attended and what do you like about those. Even though if you don't have lessons learned to take on from the previous events, what worked well in previous events that you liked. See if you can bring those to your event. For me, what I always find overwhelming is contacting speakers. Speakers are volunteers like any other, and I never want to scare them off or be unfriendly. I generally prefer to be behind the scenes. For me, that's delegating as much as possible. We have a great team, and then if not, I do my best to try and keep things in order. Who makes things easy with templates as well. That's always nice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cassian. Claire, what about you for this one?
I find when people don't do what they're supposed to do overwhelming. There is another word I would use, but overwhelming is probably a good one. I think just coming to expect that and accounting for, like what Cassian was saying about speakers finding that quite overwhelming, like that is a big block in my event planning process, is when I love all of our speakers, that when they don't submit things on time, that's incredibly, it affects so much more than perhaps they realize. So I think allowing for that and maybe building out extra time, and then I don't want to say it's in the public forum, but I always ask for things like 10 days before they're due, because I know that it will come to it and there'll be, another time. Locked drop boxes, so lock the Dropbox so they can't make last minute changes. It's also a really good tactic. But more generally speaking, how to avoid overwhelm is checking the attention to detail. So when a task comes in, really, I've got a checklist that my team uses, that is like a list of questions, like, who does this affect? Is this critical? Does this need to happen now? What can we do to make sure that that is executed in the right way and in the right time frame, and then it drops down into the main event timeline so that we're all accountable and we know our deadlines.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing that. Keith, would you like to add anything to this one?
No, I think they both did a fantastic job.
For sure. All right, our next question is on technology. I know, Cassian, you've alluded to this quite a bit, but tech can be a great asset for event organizers. So what advice would you give to organizers who are just getting started with some new tech to support their event planning? Cassian, we can start with you.
I think by far the best advice I can give is not to overcomplicate things. I love technology, but it's so easy to get bogged down with overly technical solutions to simple problems. I mean, you only have so much time today to work on the event. Don't waste that time implementing something that might not matter to the attendees. Focus on the core features that make your event a success. For us, that'd be our website, our Whova page, the laptops we provide to the events. Make sure those are as good and as stable as they can be, so attendees get the best experience they can possibly have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Claire, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with Cassian there. Don't overcomplicate it. Also, I'm a learn by doing person, so I could sit through a million things, but I wouldn't actually learn it until I do it. Whova is a great tool. I just want to say that it's changed the way that I'm able to run my events, and also, the value that it brings to exhibitors for lead retrieval is unsurpassed. So it's not something that I would ever run an event without. I think that utilize the resources that you do have. So Whova has some great planning tools, as to some other tools that we use. There are good instructional videos on there. But my advice to my team is that, just give it a go. You can't break anything. I'm talking about Whova, I'm not talking about anything else specifically, but there isn't anything that you do on there that can't be undone apart from publishing event, right? So you just give it a go, and it's fairly intuitive. Yeah, just those are my tips, really.
That's great. Thank you so much, Claire. So looking back on your event planning experience, just to reflect a little bit and summarize some things, what are some key things you've learned about managing staff workload or resources effectively? And what advice can you offer other event organizers facing similar challenges? Claire, we'll go back to you.
Assume nothing and check everything is probably the biggest lesson that I've learned. Keeping everyone accountable, but in order to keep them accountable, you need to have them buy in to your event. So those are really my top tips for that. And I think also as well, just workload, just recognizing when people are a bit stressed and just saying that, I know this is really a tough time. It always is, but this is why we've done all of this work before to make this time as less stressful as possible. But often it is still stressful, but you may be less stressed than perhaps you would have been should you have not done that work pre that time.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Claire. I like your phrasing of assume nothing and check everything. Keith, what about you for this one?
All the things that Claire said, and find amazing people. Like, people make things happen. The more I have to rely on myself to be able to do those things, the worse an experience is going to be. If I can find and build into and train up the right people who have the right heart for the work and the right skills to get it done, that's always 10 times better.
Absolutely. Cassian, what about you?
In case of the best, rely on your people. Make sure that the things you're doing make sense. Double check. We mentioned the Red Book before. I love the Run Book. Yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for your insights. This does wrap up our panel discussion. So following our schedule, we will go to our live audience Q&A. So we have had a few different questions submitted, but by far our most popular one is asking about how many staff do you think is best to set up or run Whova during your conference? So whoever wants to can answer. I know, Cassian, maybe we can start with you for this one. How many people do you have set up Whova normally for your event?
That's a good question. I think it depends on what you're doing in Whova as well. If you're doing something with the new couple speakers, you need people managing that. Otherwise, I have to be on. We had Google Forms for that before. During the event, we had a couple of people managing Whova, was sending announcements and stuff. We have a couple people I know it said no check-in staff, I think, on the thing, but we have people on Hoover for the check-in staff. If you're checking people into sessions as well, that is going to be additional people. I think we usually have I think 2 or 3 people just managing, sending announcements, keeping an eye on the community boards, making sure that everything's moderated as best they can, making sure that things don't change without it's supposed to. I think, yeah, it depends on your feature set.
For sure. Claire, what about you? Do you have anything to add for this one?
So is the question how many people to set it up or how many people to use it?
Set up and run during the event, which I think is going to be very different. We have 2 or 3 during the events,
Yeah.
but before then, most everyone's on Hoover, like 10 or 15, because we have to manage the agenda, managing embed. So that's part of our tech team. We need marketing team. Most everyone's on Hoover.
Sure.
So it really depends on the event.
Yeah, I mean, I have everyone who's involved with the event set up on Hoover, right? But in terms of, I find it as an event manager, you can populate all of the stuff that you need to populate, and then you can add your admins, and then they take care of their individual sections, right? When you're in an event, you know, that can vary to the amount of attendees that you have. So for example, on check-in terminals, you would have, you know, we generally say 1 to every 50 people is probably what you would need to make sure that that check-in runs smoothly. And we do utilize the attendee check-in feature on Hoover. So having people registered on that is really important. All of our exhibitors use Hoover, so the exhibitor manager will obviously manage that process before. But honestly, I find it really intuitive, and everyone who uses it is, you know, a big fan of the interface, and so it is quite a streamlined process for me anyway.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. Our next question we have is from Miranda, and the question is, do you have any specific tips for inputting data for individualized agendas?
Not for me.
I guess for individualized agendas, would be different agendas per person or different agendas via track?
That's a great question. Yeah, Miranda, if you want to clarify the question, feel free to in the chat or the Q&A.
I think we try and have as much of everything as visible as possible. Just because we don't have we don't currently segment the schedule based off of the person attending. I think we're looking at doing that next year because we're looking at doing Hoover registration. But I think just making sure everyone can see everything and able to see things they want to do. In terms of if you're exporting your agenda into Hoover, I mean, using Hoover templates is nice. Yeah, I'm looking at the chat as well if you want to clarify.
Absolutely. And if anybody else has any questions they'd like to add, feel free to go ahead and add. If there are any other additional questions, we will go ahead and wrap up our panel. But Claire, Cassian, and Keith, thank you all so much again for being our guest panelists. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights with us, and I know our audience does as well. I know I got some great takeaways from your advice. I'm sure our audience did too. And to our audience members, thank you all so much for being here to share your thoughts, for asking great questions. It was a pleasure to host this session, and I hope you had a great time learning from our guest panelists on today's topic. So other than that, thank you all once again for attending our session, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.